With Mass Effect Andromeda releasing well over a month ago now, and with a fair amount of people having now completed the main story campaign, attention is slowly turning to what the future holds in terms of the game's DLC. Hi everyone, Ash here from MEOdyssey, and in this video we'll be taking a moment and looking at what DLC will likely release for the game, as well as a couple of smaller honourable mentions too. Also, Rima and I were originally going to record this video together, but due to some microphone issues and until Rima can get them fixed, I'll be recording solo. But know that what is said in this video comes from us both. Finally, spoiler warning for those who have yet to reach the epilogue of the game, we will be looking at it, so you have been warned. So firstly, let's start with what we think will likely be released by BioWare in terms of DLC. In the game, there are 3 of what we are calling points of interest that could be expanded into DLC. The first and probably the most obvious one is the QUARIAN arc, and the events of what happened to that arc. There are 2 main references in-game that give us at the very least small hints and ideas about what could potentially happen in a QUARIAN arc DLC. The first is a conversation with Director Tan early in the game. You get a dialogue option on the conversation wheel, select it and Tan proceeds to tell you about other possible arcs, including the one for the QUARIANs. Tan continues to say that the reason the QUARIANs did not leave with the first wave was because they were bringing other races on their arc with them, the Elcor, Volus, Hanar and the Drell, but due to these different races needing different environments to survive, as well as races not being used to travelling in cryosleep, I'm looking at you Hanar, much longer and much more precise preparations had to be made for them. Fast forward to the epilogue of the game, and while you walk around talking to people, you come across Specialist Rin G, who grabs your attention by saying she has some important news for you. She proceeds to play a transmission from the arc Kila Sia, the QUARIAN arc, and by the sounds of it, they are in a world of trouble. Have a listen.
Repeating, this is the arc Kila Sia. The situation is not under control. Note and avoid until further updates. Repeating.
Having heard that the QUARIAN Pathfinder is warning others to stay away, and our Pathfinder saying all we can do is wait, it seems a pretty sure thing that the DLC surrounding the events of what happened to the QUARIAN arc and what would happen from a potential rescue mission by the Tempest crew will be coming to Mass Effect Andromeda at some point in the future. The next idea for a future DLC involves Primus, Archon's second-in-command. After the conclusion of the main story, we see Primus looking ominously over Meridian, clearly a little peeved and wanting to take some sweet revenge on the Andromeda Galaxy's newest inhabitants. While Archon spent most of the game obsessing over the Remnant and their technology, Primus was in the background, trying to keep Archon on the course of the Ket's original plan, which was to exalt that sector of Andromeda. But with Archon now seemingly out of the way, and with Andromeda's newest guests now being Andromeda's newest heroes, will Primus decide to carry on the original plan of the Ket, or will the Archon's obsession with the Remnant carry over to Primus, only with added anger and revenge sprinkled on top? While it would be interesting to see what Primus has planned, we're not sure how strong this storyline lends itself to a separate DLC, and may well be left as an unfinished story. Although with the controversy that surrounded Andromeda's release, BioWare may look to tie up as many loose ends as possible, considering we may not see another Mass Effect title for a long time, with BioWare now working heavily on their new IP, as well as probably working on the next installment in the Dragon Age series. Finally, we have the JARDAAN. This mysterious and ancient race that are nowhere to be found, but are the creators of all the remnant tech strewn across the Helios cluster in Andromeda. We don't hear about the JARDAAN or even learn of their name until pretty much right at the end of the game. And because we're in the end game trying to chase down Archon, we barely get any time to think about what we just learned. We know so little about the JARDAAN that it would seem that at the very least a good idea to give them a DLC just so that we can learn about them. But here's the thing, as much as we want to know more about the JARDAAN, we get a feeling that they may be saved for a future Mass Effect game, should there be one. BioWare devs in the past have said they wouldn't necessarily be making an Andromeda trilogy in terms of a continuous storyline over multiple games. The hints back before release were that any new Mass Effect game based in Andromeda could have their own self-contained story, meaning any DLC to be released may well have to wrap up any loose ends. With the development cycle between big RPG games becoming even longer, it wouldn't be surprising if we didn't see another Mass Effect game for another 3 to 5 years, which makes getting the DLC right even more important to make Andromeda a game to remember, especially after the launch that the game had. But with BioWare still working on further patches to fix the technical issues the game experienced just after launch, it still may be a little while longer before we see any DLC. At this point we should give some smaller honourable mentions to a couple of other things that Rima and I discussed. One idea was to have a more light-hearted story DLC, much in the same vein as Liam's loyalty mission. But we wouldn't really know what kind of story we'd like to see in this, and it's unlikely that this would hold up over an entire DLC, so maybe a little wishful on our part. Another thought was to have a story DLC that would pick up later after the events of the endgame in Andromeda, say 6 months or so later, so that we can see the effects of the terraforming process that we activated on Meridian, getting to briefly revisit the planets to see how they're doing, and then have a separate story start up after that, for example, go off to save the QUARIAN arc. Essentially, joining a few ideas together to make a bigger, more substantial DLC offering. But that's likely just our wishful thinking at work again. So that's all for now, but what do you think? Do you think that the more obvious options we've presented here are likely to be DLCs that release later down the line, or do you have other suggestions for what you would like to see as a DLC in Mass Effect Andromeda? Be sure to let us know down in the comments below. As always, you can subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on all things Mass Effect and more, and you can help the channel to grow by sharing the video too. Thanks for watching, we'll see you again very soon.